telling all sides of the story. This is The Rita Cosby Show.
I want to ask you tonight here on The Rita Cosby Show, how concerned are you that these protests are really going to get out of hand? And don't you see a double standard? I brought up the Summer of Love protest because it was far from the Summer of Love. It was the Summer of Hate. And remember, it was about race relations, and there were so many different riots that took place all over the country. And again, many officers were, killed. There were a number of other individuals that were killed. Police stations were burned to the ground. Businesses were burned to the ground. There were police officers who had, their heads hit with bricks and chairs and everything else. $2 billion of damage. That's just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of cities have never recovered from that summer of race relations. And now people are deeming what they are starting to see in the last 24, 48 hours in America. And it breaks my heart to say this. They are starting to see what may be the summer of rage about to start, because clearly the left doesn't have anything else that they can go after. What are they going to do? Inflation is skyrocketing. Cost of gas is skyrocketing. The border is skyrocketing with the illegals coming in. The Afghanistan withdrawal was terrible. It's a mess in Ukraine. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so now they have found this issue, and they are clearly going to be screaming it to the rooftops between now and November. And already they don't think that there's a problem with them protesting outside the House of Supreme Court Justices. We know that over the weekend, they went to Brett Kavanaugh's house in Chevy Chase, Maryland. That's right there on the D.C. border. And then they also marched. They went to Chief Justice John Roberts' house. Then they came back again. And then tonight, by the way, they protested outside of Sam Alito's house. And apparently Sam Alito is at an undisclosed location because he's concerned about his safety. What the heck has America come to? That if you don't like a draft decision, this is not even the real decision. Wait till the real decision comes down. And if it's the same as this looks like it's going to be, imagine what they're going to be doing. I mean, this is like decision by mob rule. And by the way, it is illegal to protest outside a justice's home in an effort to obstruct justice or to sway their opinions. It is against the law. So where is our attorney general tonight? This is the guy who was going to go after parents who were upset about critical race theory being taught in schools. This is the Chief Justice, who said he's going to treat everybody fairly, and who picked Mary Poppins, remember, didn't know her Mary Poppins background for the disinformation panel. He would have every grounds right now to arrest all those protesters outside each and every house, and that would send a message, don't do it. And guess what? Do you see a pattern here? Because remember in the Summer of Love in 2020, when there were so many of those protests that got really violent pretty quickly, especially at night, and they're protesting at night now too. Remember, they didn't start arresting them. And in fact, in so many cities, like in New York City, Bill de Blasio basically told the law enforcement to stand down. Stand down, do not do anything. And so they had to basically stand there when they were getting beat up and somebody was throwing a brick at them or a chair at them or water at them or whatever, or worse. They literally had to stand down. And it wasn't until like a few days later, when basically so many businesses were burned to the ground, that they finally stepped up and said, we're able to do our job. Please let the best police department in the country do their job. Shame on Bill de Blasio. I still don't know why businesses didn't sue the heck out of him and other people and go after them, because it was his decision to basically let New York City burn because he was agreeing with those protesters. And that's what's happening again now. We are so much seeing the far left at this hour basically condoning it. They're basically saying it's okay. And even Nancy Pelosi has come out. This is amazing. The House Speaker, who is, top, of course, in the House there for the Democratic Party, a major leader in the Democratic Party, she has come out and basically say that people have a right when it's righteous, righteous movement. It's a righteous action is what she has said. She's basically saying it's okay. And the White House finally kind of tepidly said, well, we don't really know if people should be protesting or whatever. We respect the courts. They kind of like circled back around it. And they basically did a punt. They were asked about it last week, and last week they were praising it. This week they're kind of going, well, maybe it's not a good idea. Wink, wink, keep on going. To me, we are really into really scary, tough times. So tonight, I want to hear your thoughts. I'm going to be taking your calls all night here on The Rita Cosby Show. What are your thoughts about where this is headed? And do you see a complete double standard as I do? Because, as I point out, there were 574 riots in 2020. They didn't condone those. In fact, they went one step further. Kamala Harris, who is now our vice president, was praising the Minnesota Freedom Fund that was bailing out the rioters all over the country, not just in Minnesota, but all over the country. It was called the Minnesota Freedom Fund. But if they rioted in New York or other cities near you, they were basically given these slips. We saw them on camera. They're like, here's the slip. If you get arrested, don't worry about it. Here's the number you call and you'll get right out. No problem. Courtesy of Kamala Harris. And people on Joe Biden's campaign also were supporting that as well. How shameful and horrible is that? And guess what? So far, they have not been condemning. They've been saying, oh, they're angry as heck and people have a right to protest. You don't have a right to protest in front of somebody's home at the middle of the night, and it is illegal, by the way, in front of a justice's house. There's actually a statute that says you should not be protesting to try to influence a decision. Guess what? They haven't even come down with their decision. They definitely are trying to influence a decision. So I am appalled and I'm outraged and I'm just disgusted that so far the Democrats have done nothing. If anything, they are encouraging this. And it makes me think they are going to do the same thing that they allowed as they saw so many cities burn and so much property destroyed and condemned and problems and issues and people seriously hurt and dead. And yet it was basically crickets from the Democratic side. Is that what's in store? And how concerned are you and how outraged are you that they are allowing this? It's like selective prosecution. The only thing that they will call a riot is January 6th. That's the only thing that seems to be a riot to them. Everything else, the burning of police stations, the killing of officers, the killing of citizens, the killing of business owners, that's righteous. That's because it fits their philosophy or it appeals to their base, their far left agenda. Give me a break. This to me is so un-American. It's shameful. And to me, it is outright rule by mob. And I am really concerned where we're headed, everybody. 1-800-848-9222. 1-800-848-9222. Here's a little bit of some of the protesters. Listen to what they were saying and the way they were chanting it. By the way, when they were out there, a lot of them were holding up like coat hangers and saying, we'll abort your baby. We'll kill your baby. We'll do that. Listen to this as well.
Keep your rosary! Up our ovaries! Keep your rosary! Up our ovaries! Keep your rosary! Up our ovaries! Keep your rosary! Up our ovaries!
Keep your rosary off our ovary. And here is another group chanting some more vile stuff.
Hands off! Our bodies! Hands off! Our bodies! Hands off! Our bodies! Hands off! Our bodies!
In tonight's Back the Blue, a powerful story coming from Atlanta, Georgia. Well, it may not be the reason that the app was developed, but Find My iPhone recently proved a key tool in helping to save a 9-year-old child. This is an amazing story. Recently, Jerica Moore of Georgia pulled into a parking lot and briefly exited her vehicle, leaving her keys and her young son in the car. Moore used the iPhone tracking feature to help lead authorities to her car after it was stolen while her son was inside. Imagine how scary that was. Well, the Find My app gives user the ability to locate Apple devices. On Facebook, the APD shared how a man jumped into the car and sped off with the child still inside. So officers immediately responded to the scene. They began their preliminary investigation. She was able to track her son's iPhone by using location and relay real-time tracking to officers who were able to then track the information and locate the vehicle. And when an Atlanta police officer was able to spot the vehicle being closely pursued by Georgia State Patrol, the suspect attempted to flee from the officers with the child still in the vehicle. But the Georgia State Patrol was able to successfully execute a precision immobilization technique to render the vehicle immobile. Bravo to them. The suspect was then taken into custody without any further incident. And by the way, the child was inside and said to be okay. So a number of people who saw this said, boy, the way, bye. Not all heroes wear capes. And the police department said, we thank all the officers and all the different agencies involved in apprehending this brazen suspect and getting this child to safety. We're happy to report that the child and his mother have now been reunited and both are okay. What an amazing story. And also creative thinking on that mom's part, being able to track the vehicle. Thank goodness it had a happy ending. Well, we are talking about something that's not so happy, and that's the reaction of the left from this leaked Supreme Court opinion from the High Court of the Supreme Court, of course, and it's been causing headlines. And in the last few hours, a whole bunch of different groups have been putting out messages saying, we're going to do a nationwide protest this weekend. They are planning on different protests, some in New York, some in Los Angeles, there's some in Colorado, basically 50 to 60 cities at least across America. There will be major, major protests. And listen, as long as they're peaceful, that's fine. But so far, they have already crossed the line, I think, tremendously. And the law says it too. By going to justices' homes over the weekend. They went to two of them. They went to one tonight. Samuel Alito, who wrote that decision, that opinion, the draft that they were looking at. Well, they went to his home just a few hours ago, and they're shouting all this vile, horrible stuff. And then also they went and firebombed 2 Molotov cocktails inside a family office that basically was a pro-life group in Wisconsin. And the message on the outside said, abortions aren't safe. You aren't either. I mean, the rhetoric is getting so heated already. And by the way, Nancy Pelosi, again, who is, the House Speaker, that's a very important role. People are watching to see what she says and what she does. Well, she came out and lauded protesters. She called it righteous anger. I wanted to make sure I gave you guys the right quote. Righteous anger to march and mobilize over the end of Roe. So in other words, keep doing it because we agree with what you're protesting about. Just like the Summer of Love, where they were burning down buildings and beating up cops and, everything else. And because they believe with that philosophy of what they were protesting, that they were protesting, they said was, right, criminal justice and all that, even though it morphed into all these other things and doesn't give them a right to attack other people. They didn't want to condemn it. The left didn't want to condemn it. They never condemned it. In fact, Nancy Pelosi said they should keep on protesting, remember? So that seems to be her message on this, too. And that, I think, is really, really scary, guys. Here is a New York fireman outside a church at an abortion protest over the weekend. Take a listen.
Not the church, not the state, the people must decide their fate.
I'm the people. I'm the people. I am the people. The people have decided, the court has decided. You lose. You have no choice. Not your body, not your choice. Your body is mine, and you're happy to obey me.
And Senator Tom Tillis, Republican, said he is outraged that justices are being invaded in their homes. And he says this is just the beginning and that justices should be protected. Take a listen.
I think it's inappropriate. It's unsafe, and it's inappropriate for the Supreme Court. Look, I've had multiple protests at my house. I've had them trespass my property. I'm an elected official. The justices of the Supreme Court should be treated differently. They should be treated with respect. And I do agree that I don't believe it changes their opinion, and it may galvanize their decisions.
Yeah, if they look like they kowtow to pressure, that's a whole other issue right now. And where, all the justices should be coming out. I mean, Justice Roberts came out and said, this is not appropriate. Justice Clarence Thomas came out and spoke. But all the justices should uniformly put out a message saying, do not do this to my colleagues. Especially the liberal justices should stand up for the others as a matter of principle. We are going to talk about, quote, Victory Day in Russia because Vladimir Putin was out there parading a lot of his military hardware, basically blaming the West, blaming Ukraine, saying his goal is to denazify Ukraine and that he was doing it in defense of his country. But what's interesting? His air power was not on display. He had this big parade where you show off all your military hardware, and they typically do a big air show. Is that because a lot of his planes are unfortunately out of commission? Or is that because maybe they're busy in the war in Ukraine? And in the last few hours, there have been some more strikes in Odessa and in different parts of the country, by the way. So he is using his planes there for sure. And also more horrible news coming out of over the weekend where they shot an elementary school where they actually did a big strike on an elementary school that was being used as a shelter. And they believe that up to 60 people or more potentially were in that shelter when it was hit. It was clearly a school being used as a shelter, and the Russians continue to just pound away. And we're going to talk about that later on in the hour. The other thing that's also so stunning about what I'm seeing is happening now, if things are not bad enough in Ukraine, and today I love the fact that President Zelensky did his own Victory Day address saying, quote, we will win. We're going to kick your butt, basically, Putin. We will win. But there's some really scary numbers that are coming out. And I was seeing that over 1 million Ukrainians, it's like 1.2 million Ukrainians have been taken to Russia for, quote, re-education camps. That's a pretty scary word. And you think about, is it a concentration camp? What's happening to those people? More than 1 million people physically taken from Ukraine, now in camps in Russia. What's going on and what are they doing to these people and what are the plans for these people? I mean, it's horrible and it's horrific. And Putin today not making really any declaration of victory. So I can't wait to get your thoughts on what he was trying to do today with this parade, but not really declaring victory, talking about his nukes, talking about the West. Is he planning something horrific? Is he trying to negotiate a deal? Where do you see this going? I can't wait to get your thoughts later on in the hour here on the Rita Cosby Show on that. Meantime, we are talking about these attacks that have been happening. And I say attacks because they're verbal attacks. And there are some physical attacks that have been taking place at pro-life locations and also at the homes of conservative justices. Take a listen. Here are some of the protesters over the weekend protesting, being pretty vocal outside the homes. They were there outside of the Chief Justice's home and also Brett Kavanaugh. They do not like them. And they also marched on Alito's home just a few hours ago, too, as well. Take a listen. Here they are in action.
Abortion rights are human rights. 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 Abortion rights are human rights.
And imagine that outside your home. And that's like the nicest thing they have been shouting. You know, they've been like holding up the coat hangers and screaming, and they've had like fake babies. And there was one scene outside a church, and I believe it was outside New York, where this woman, a guy dressed up as a woman as a baby, was holding a fetus with a coat hanger and saying, I'm going to kill this. Ha, ha, ha. I'm going to kill this. Ha. I mean, it's like, it is so crazy. It has gotten so demented and drawing signs of coat hangers and chalk on the sidewalks. I mean, this is getting really crazy. And it's only been about a weekend. So can you imagine when the actual decision comes down, and if it turns out to be anything like the opinion, they are going to go nuts. And so far, the left is not really condemning it. That's what to me is so outrageous. You have the president of the United States, when he was asked about it last week, was like, well, you know what? Didn't condemn the leak that someone leaked for the very first time outside the U.S. Supreme Court of an opinion, a draft opinion. Didn't condemn that action, which potentially is a crime. Didn't say anything about it. Just said, I understand because women have a right to choose. Women have a right. And yeah, that's absolutely correct. But he didn't condemn the fact. They said, well, aren't you disturbed that now they're putting out the addresses of Supreme Court justices, Mr. President? Don't you think that that's a troubling trend? Oh, you know what? They have a right to be passionate. They have a right to be. Are you kidding me? You know darn well if the shoe were on the other foot, they would go crazy. And so many constitutional experts have just really blasted the president and this administration. A couple hours ago, Circleback Psaki was like, well, you know what? Yeah, it's not a good idea. We have to respect the judges to do their job. That's not what you say. That's barely a condemnation. What she should have said was right away, and the president, do not go after justices. We have to respect the process. Let's see what it is. We'll fight it in court. Peaceful protests, that's okay, but don't go to the homes. Go to the Supreme Court, be peaceful, get your word out, get the message out, go to the voting booth, whatever you want to do. But to sit and not condemn giving out the home addresses of Supreme Court justices, I think the liberal left just showed their cards and showed that they will do anything they can do to galvanize their base and do anything not to condemn the far left. I mean, this is just outrageous. Well, Jonathan Turley, constitutional scholar, had this to say. He said it is ridiculous that this president doesn't take control of this. And guess what? It's that kind of action that leads to more protests, because if they feel they have a free license from the White House, and they certainly have a free license, it seems, from Nancy Pelosi, who calls it righteous anger. In other words, keep going, guys. That means things are going to get really ugly awfully quick, and shame on the left for not condemning this.
It's a fine thing that the president came out and condemned firebombing of a pro-life office. But there should be something short of that that is enough to warrant condemnation from this president. These justices were doxxed. An opinion was leaked. There has to be some line in our society that remains inviolate, something we can agree upon collectively, where we just say enough, that it's wrong. And that has to start with the President of the United States. He's got to be a moral compass.
And he doesn't seem to want to go there. I mean, clearly, for a guy who half the time seems incoherent, he was very clear not to condemn the leaker, not even to basically chastise it, not to condemn the addresses of the Supreme Court coming out. I mean, this is outrageous. Here's a little bit more, Jonathan Turley.
What is really chilling about all of this is the utter silence that has come from the White House. They said they simply don't have a policy on whether these protests and the doxing behind it are wrong, or that they don't really have a position on condemning a leak that violated every ethical principle that governs the Supreme Court and the legal profession. That's a void created by this White House. And what can fill it is something we don't need. It's filled with violence and tolerance and intimidation. That's what happens when the president leaves a void.
Absolutely. And doesn't set ground rules and say, guess what? This is not appropriate. I mean, what? The Supreme Court only works when they do decisions that you like, far left? How dare they put the address up and the president of the United States doesn't have the guts to say this is not appropriate? I mean, that to me is absolutely so transparent of what they will do to try to galvanize their base and to try to win in November at any cost in the midterms with the House and with the Senate. Had to play some of these outlandish comments coming from Vladimir Putin on his Victory Day, which is the day of victory of the Russians over Germany in World War II. And everybody was wondering, what is he going to do today? Is he going to announce a full-blown war, which he didn't do? Is he going to announce some sort of victory, some form? Is he going to try to call up, more folks for the draft there in Russia? What will he do? Well, he did do this big parade. But what was really interesting, first of all, I felt like I was watching, quite frankly, Hitler in the 1930s, kind of parading out there with the military might and marching and the whole to-do. And yet there were no airplanes. And a lot of people are wondering, is it because they're busy, bombarding still Ukraine? And a lot of them have been destroyed also in the war. And he maybe didn't have any extra ones, if you will, to showcase. The other thing, too, the big general who is in charge of the operations in Ukraine, a lot of people were wondering, why was he not brought out in the parade? He was nowhere to be seen, and people have not seen him apparently in a bit of time. So there's a lot of rumors circulating about that. Take a listen. Here is a little bit of Vladimir Putin basically trying to justify, though, to his masses, saying the reason that Russia went in was self-defense because he claims that the U.S. and the rest of the West were planning to attack Russia. Listen to this twist.
Last December, we proposed a treaty on the guarantees of security. Russia called on the West for an honest dialogue, reasonable compromise solutions in the interests of each other. But that was in vain. The NATO countries did not want to hear us. And that means that, in fact, they had very different plans, and we could see that. They openly were preparing for yet another punitive operation in Donbass for an invasion of our historic lands, including Crimea.
And so we had to go in and slaughter the whole country. 1-800-848-9222. 1-800-848-9222. What do you make of his comments? Do you think it is a sign that he's trying to justify what he's done so far to work some peace deal? Or do you think he is preparing them for the worst yet to come on the Ukrainian people, although it's already been horrific, as we know from the numbers? 1-800-848-9222. Let's go to Tony on line one. Tony, your thoughts.
So how you doing, Rita? Yeah, I went to Ukraine several times, Odessa in particular. There was a huge Orthodox Jewish community there. And all these claims of them being Nazis and so forth is ridiculous. It's just, why would they have such a large Orthodox community there if that were true?
Well, and also Zelensky's Jewish, that's the other thing. Zelensky's Jewish, Tony, and he's just doing it whatever he can to rally his base. And he knows that he's trying to do something to justify going back and again, Victory Day over the Germans, over the Nazis. And it's like, okay, we're going back, and he's just trying to use that mindset. Let's go to Johnny, line 4. Johnny, your thoughts?
I know a little bit about it. Most of the news is incorrect, but you just played a Putin speech, and he made the comment, as he was speaking, he mentioned Stefan Bandera, who the actual Azov battalion, the quote-unquote Nazis.
So, hey, Johnny, I don't want to, we don't have a lot of time for you to revisit history, but real quick, don't you think it's a twist that, we're going in, we had to defend ourselves from the West? Come on, Johnny.
But your translation was wrong of the speech.
Hey, Johnny, that wasn't my voice translating. I don't know Russian, but thank you. We're going to move on to someone else who speaks English. Let's go to Jimmy.
The communist press, the Soviets, anybody who opposes them, they call Nazis or fascist. The American Communist Party papers call Giuliani ultra-right fascist. This is what the communists do. It's their history. Everybody's the bad guy. They're always the good guy. Putin is successful confusing people on both sides. They've got us confused. You got very bad people in America who are working against America, but because they support the Ukrainians, they look like they're not really working to destroy America. Very expert way to confuse Both
Yeah, you're
sides.
right. You know, it's sort of like the propaganda machine. We'll be back tomorrow, guys.